If it's one thing that I appreciate, no matter what, it's honesty. And Michael Vick gave that to us in doses when he talked about his bigger plans in the coaching world. Oh, yeah, it's Locked On HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darrion Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me. Make a Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. Just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Will I one day go to calling Twitter by their adopted name of X? I don't know, but today is not that day. So follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode wraps up with a look at Clark Atlanta, who knocked off Edward Waters to claim, the top spot in the SIAC East in men's basketball. Then we got a two-part on Norfolk State. I didn't expect this. I knew that I would come in here in segment 2 and talk about the newest addition to the Norfolk State quarterback room. You got a 4-star transfer player out of South Florida. But what I didn't know is where we're going to lead off today's topic. And that's the fact that Michael Vick has expressed his goals within coaching. And it's not what I expected. Mostly because I didn't expect him to have any huge goals as far as coaching. I thought this was kind of a take it day by day type of situation. But boy, was I wrong, because that's not what it is. Michael Vick is one of these celebrity coaches, the NFL to HBCU pipeline coaches. Well, you know what they say the NFL stands for, right? Not for long. And I could use those same 3 words to describe how Michael Vick's tenure at Norfolk State is probably going to go if he is successful. Not for long. And this isn't me speculating. This isn't me being pessimistic at all. This is coming from his mouth because he talked about what his plans are. Now, am I reading in between the lines a tad bit? Of course. But I mean, if I was just reporting it to you, I could have tweeted that. So I'm going to report, or I'm going to read between the lines just a tad bit. But you let me know if you think this is a stretch. I certainly don't. Michael Vick's quote when he was on the I Am Athlete podcast was this: I see myself potentially going to a Power 5, which break. We know it's now Power 4, but you've been in the game for as long as him. Adjusting to calling it Power 5 to 4 is weird. RIP the Pac-12. Moment of silence, please. All right, so here goes Michael Vick's quote. I see myself potentially going to a Power 5 one day. That's the goal. Anything I get myself involved in, I'm always going to look into the future and where I can take it, or where I can go, or where we can go, because it's a team effort and I have a great staff around me. Man, when I tell you that quote right there said a whole lot. And I don't know how people are going to take this one, but I'll tell you what, I appreciate it. I can't say that I like it. I can't say that I dislike it, but I surely can tell you that I appreciate it. I appreciate the honesty because, listen, there is going to be an immediate comparison. Deion Sanders. I made sure when I seen this, don't get on social media. Don't try to see what the reaction is going to be. I'm only speculating, but I think it's a safe assumption to say many people will point out what Michael Vick has said his plans are and compare that to what actually happened with Deion Sanders. For those who weren't around, or maybe those who don't know the connection that I'm speaking about, Deion Sanders coached at Jackson State for 2 years. Then he went on to the University of Colorado. I think that most people are going to say, are y'all going to be upset about this? I think that's a fair question. Asking if we're going to treat Michael Vick's plans of one day going to a Power 5 how we treated Deion Sanders' actual exit to the Power 5, I think that is a fair question to try to at least set some sort of bar of fairness. Let me tell you this right now. The reason I find those things different is that when Deion came, it felt like more than just a job. If it's going to be a job, let it be a job. I, for one, am never going to be upset about that. That's why I can sit here and tell you I don't dislike Michael Vick's comments. If it's going to be a job, say that. Especially with Vick being the hometown hero and all of this love for coming back to where he's from, I think it's important we get this out the way up front. I'm here for a good time, not a long time. Right? Like we got to be honest about this. Deion Sanders, it felt a little bit more than just, hey, I'm here to coach. Was that him leaning into how happy he was to be at Jackson State? Possibly. Did we assume things? Possibly. I would have to go back and listen to that introductory press conference to see if things were overtly stated or if they were assumptions made based on things. But I can tell you that my issue was the way he approached Jackson State and then how quickly he left. That was mine. That was mine to resolve, right? But when it comes to Michael Vick, I don't have that. Michael Vick's quote erases any expectations that people can have about his duration. Because if Virginia Tech comes calling next year, Michael Vick is gone next year. Period. And I don't even know if I should feel any kind of way about it. I know there'll be some people who say they're using HBCUs as a stepping stone. I've been very constant on my opinion of the stepping stone conversation. I don't really look at it that way. Most people in coaching are climbing a ladder. Did I think Michael Vick was? No, because like I said earlier, I thought this was kind of we taking it day by day. This is new for me. I don't quite know. But then I remember in his introductory press conference, Michael Vick talked about how he was already thinking about coaching. This is not like Deshaun Jackson, who was not thinking about coaching. This is not like Eddie George, who was not thinking about coaching. Michael Vick already had his mind that, hey, man, I'm thinking about wanting to coach. And then Norfolk State popped up. So when you already have these dreams, when you already have these ambitions, it shouldn't shock anybody that he's sitting here and saying, I want to go Power 4 one day. That's what I want to do because I'm trying to be a coach. Now, how fast does that happen? I don't know. Does it happen Deion Sanders fast where you're only there for 2 seasons, 2.5? Because I can't forget that spring season. I think that really helped him. It was a nice warm up. It was a nice ramp up for him. It was essentially like spring practice, but let's say 2 to 3 years and then you out the door. I don't know if that happens for Vick. I really don't. I think that in general, the MEAC, with how little conference games that they play, it lessens the margin for error. And when you're not perfect, you could easily lose that conference. And if you don't win the conference back-to-back years, I don't see you getting a job on the FBS level. Or excuse me, a Power 4 level. Because like football, specifically football, I'm not speaking about any other sport, but specifically football is kind of divided into 3 to 4 subdivisions before we get into D2. Now, I really do think that there is a divide on multiple levels. You have Power 4, you have Group of 5. And I think there's some level of that on the FCS level that I haven't quite diagnosed, but maybe one day we'll break it down. But there is a P5, or excuse me, P4, G5 distinction on the FBS. We don't talk about it enough because this is Locked On HBCU. Why would we? But let's be very clear. Power 4, Group of 5, not the same. They're just both FBS, but they are not the same or looked at the same. Those schools are not looked at the same. All right. But if Michael Vick is trying to go from Norfolk State straight to a FBS Power 4 school, I think it might take him more than 2 to 3 years. It might take him 4 or 5. He says one day, but I want to be very clear. One day means as soon as possible. And I think people are going to look at what Deion Sanders has built at Colorado. I don't think that the public view of Colorado versus some of the coaches and institutions' view of Colorado is exactly the same because there are Colorado expectations, there's Deion Sanders expectations, and it's kind of weird because Deion Sanders is the coach of Colorado. It's kind of hard to get an accurate description of how you should feel because fans will be like, hey, man, Deion Sanders is this, that, and the third. So now you expecting a college football playoff team. But then Colorado in the ascension from where they were before him, it's still good. So I think coaches, or excuse me, I think athletic directors will see what Deion did, say, I would like that for my program. And if Michael Vick can reach a high level of success and rapid, continuous success, then maybe they say, can Vick do that for us? But he's got to show and prove here first. I hope that, and I'll address another thing with Deshaun Jackson. I said something about, I hope you don't think it's sweet. And I didn't get that feel from Michael Vick. But with this quote, I don't think there's anything wrong with setting your dreams. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying where you want to be, right? Like, I think we all do that until we get into a certain place of our career. I just hope that his idea of this does not equate to, I'm about to run through this. Because Vic, I don't think so. I don't think so. It's gonna be interesting though. It is going to be interesting. But one thing I knew I was going to talk about with Michael Vick today was the fact that he pulled in another quarterback in the quarterback battle that is inevitable. It's going to happen when you have a first-year head coach and bring in a bunch of new QBs. It's gotten a whole lot more interesting, and I'm happy to see the type that Michael Vick is developing. We'll look at all of that as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Listen, it's the easiest way to get on all real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of winnings, Prize Picks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports. Whether it's the playoffs or the regular season, Prize Picks has made it easier than ever for you to get involved on all of the football action. Now it's playoff time. You have 2 games left, or you have 3 games left, the 2 conference championships and the big dance. There's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks. So here's how it works. Simple. You pick more or less on 2 or more players. Go to the Bills, Chiefs, Commanders, and Eagles. For me, it's all about Jaden Daniels in 2024, now 2025. You go ahead and put some money down on that rookie quarterback. Ready to run your game, are you? Well, this is football season, and you need to download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 just for playing Prize Picks. Run your game. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked On Buckeyes, Locked On Irish, Locked On College Football. You had the biggest game of the collegiate football season on Monday night. Make sure that you are tuning in to all of the parties that are involved. Listen, I knew we were going to talk Norfolk State football today, but right before I got ready to record, the news about what Michael Vick said dropped on Bleacher Report. Can we get a round of applause for that? Thank you very much, because that was something I'm so happy I didn't record before, because that is must discuss, not must see television. What is must discuss? Must discuss podcast. But that's what this is, man. This was exciting. I was happy to do it. I didn't need too many notes. I ran in, I did this, that, and the third. One thing I would like to add is that, oh, no, I already said that about how quickly this could happen. It's just about when this is what I wanted to add. This does change the conversation that I had about Deion, or about Michael Vick versus Deshaun Jackson in the Philadelphia Eagles Stadium. This does change that conversation, because I'm setting this for 2027. And though I do still believe that both of these coaches will be here in 2027, I don't think either one of these guys leaves in the next 3 years. If things are really good next year for Norfolk State, or even Delaware State, maybe, if things are really good and one of those 2 teams wins the conference, I may escalate, or I may escalate. What's the word I'm looking for? I don't know, but I may speed up, expedite. I may expedite the process and say 2026 of the year. We're moving this to Philadelphia. To be very clear, I think this is a great idea from Deshaun Jackson. I just think it needs to wait a little bit. I wanted to go homecoming, Philadelphia Eagles Stadium. But if one of them 2 teams wins the championship next year or this upcoming year, I may say Philadelphia 2026. We'll see. But that's just Vick's comments made me want to change and talk about that real quick. But speaking of Vick, he's got another quarterback. And a little while ago, we discussed Norfolk State picking up Earl Woods. And in that, the thumbnail says Vick got his guy. I do believe that the thumbnail is a tad bit limited in thinking. I wouldn't say misleading. I think it's limited in thinking, or limited in the view of what the episode was about, right? I think that's the best way to put it. But somebody was like, that doesn't mean he's the guy. It just means he's got somebody. And I articulate that in the show. Maybe he didn't think I articulated it well. I don't know if he even watched the show, or if the guy just based it off of that thumbnail. But I'm very open to saying maybe I didn't articulate that clear enough. So if I didn't articulate that, let me clarify right now. I don't believe that Michael Vick, or excuse me, I don't believe that Michael Vick found his guy and wasn't searching anymore. This was mostly about the fact that Michael Vick found his type of quarterback. But I only have limited space on the thumbnail, right? Like, I don't have that much space to tell you the entire show on the thumbnail. I don't have that luxury. So if you check it out, I'm hoping that it's not a lie. I'm not going to sit here and lie to you. I do think that Michael Vick has a guy, and I think that he has a good chance. I think that at the time, he was the dual threat quarterback that Michael Vick needed. But at the same time, I never thought that the job was his, even if he had to compete with Jalen Daniels. I knew he would have to compete. But now we're adding more talent. And not only are we adding more talent, we're seeing a type. We're seeing a recurring theme. And that is Norfolk State getting dual threat quarterbacks. And it makes the most sense to me. All right. So let me read to you a quote that came from Earl Woods. First off, the new quarterback that they have is Israel Carter. He goes by Izzy. So we're going to call him Izzy Carter. They're both dual threat quarterbacks. Let me explain to you what Earl Woods said. Earl Woods said, it's a blessing, honestly. Someone that I looked up to and modeled my game after growing up. For him, talking about Vick, to take a chance on me and give me an opportunity is amazing. If you model your game after Vick, athleticism is an important part of your skill set, period. There is not a singular pocket passer in the history of pocket passing that has ever said I modeled my game after Michael Vick. That's ignorant. Any pocket passer who said that didn't make it past little league, maybe middle school. But I promise you, once you get to high school, it's time to start loading up that Peyton Manning tape. It's time to start loading up Tom Brady. If you a pocket passer and you can't run outside of left and right 3 steps, you don't need to be watching Michael Vick, because that's what made him dangerous. That is what made him dangerous, his ability to use his legs. The ability to use his legs is also the reason that I always thought it was smart for him to get a quarterback who was a dual threat. I'm new to coaching. I'm just starting this. I got to lean on something I know. And the one thing I know is playing quarterback. So much so that Michael Vick said one of the difficulties for him was not having the ball in his hand. The next closest thing to having the ball in your hand is having a guy who can do something that resembles you when you had the ball in your hand. Ain't no Michael Vicks coming through the doors of Norfolk State. It ain't happening, because there ain't too many Michael Vicks walking through the doors of anywhere. So I know it ain't coming through Norfolk State. It's just not happening. But what I can do is I can get somebody who is able to run the football, and I can say, this is when I would use my legs. Let me lean on my expertise. Let me tell you what I would do in this situation, because I kind of have the same skill set, so I can cater to you. I love that. It's smart. So what do? You go get a guy who says he modeled his game after Michael Vick, and you have another guy in Izzy Carter whose first collegiate touch was a catch. He's a quarterback. Don't get me wrong. This is no disrespect to use a Lamar Jackson example and say, oh, it's time to move in a wide receiver. No, this is a quarterback, but his first touch in college was a catch. If that doesn't tell you what kind of athleticism that we're dealing with, I don't know what does. A quarterback whose first touch was a catch, the boy is an athlete. The boy is an athlete for sure. You know? So we got some of the similarities that come into play between Carter and Woods. They both have that dual threat ability that I think is smart, that Michael Vick leans into. It'll really help him, in my opinion. I think it'll get him the best quarterback play he can in year one, especially if he wants to be involved with the quarterbacks. Now, if he doesn't and he wants to use that guy from Howard, the OC, I don't remember if he was the quarterbacks coach or not, but I know that he was a passing game specialist at Howard. But if you want to use him and say, hey, we're gonna rock with him, now then maybe you don't need that dual threat guy. Maybe it doesn't matter then. But if Michael Vick wants to step over there and say, hey, it was 3rd and 3, I'm taking off. Use your legs next time. How many people would you trust more than Michael Vick when they tell you to use their legs? Just saying. Anyway, the difference comes in the amount of preparation that they have. Both Carter and Woods are dual threat quarterbacks. Both Carter and Woods come over from a collegiate program. I think Woods has spent 3 years in college, while Carter's only spent 2. But that 1 year is not the difference, because the guy with only 2 years in college under his belt, that guy has actually played. And quite frankly, if you look at his stats, he's played really well. Norfolk State has a new quarterback. And I know that we looked at Earl Woods earlier, but right now, we got to keep eyes on Izzy Carter, because I want to read to you his stat line. He only played a couple of games, so it's not a large sample size, and it's not a lot of passes. Matter of fact, when I tell you what he's done over the course of 2 weeks, it's going to sound like I'm really just talking about a half if you're talking about yards and completions and attempts. But let me just read the stat line. No more introducing it. Only 14 passes through 2 weeks. Only 14 passes, so very small sample size. But in that small sample size, he went 11 of 14 for 195 yards and 4 touchdowns. That completion percentage is going to fly under the radar because he had 4 touchdowns. But let's be very clear. Completing at 79% is a really good number. It expresses a high level of efficiency. And he has some longer throws in there, whether that was air yards, whether that was catch and run. Both of those things are valuable. I think that catch and run, quarterbacks don't get enough credit for throwing the ball in a place where receivers can run after the catch. They genuinely do not get enough credit for that, in my opinion. But yeah, the 4 touchdowns jump out, man. 2 in first week, 2 in the second week. Golly. You're looking at 4 touchdowns and 14 passes. That's a high clip rate that he will not continue, of course, right? Like, you're not going to have a touchdown every 4 passes. It's unrealistic. But at the same time, it's interesting. It definitely pulls me in. So these are just some things to look at, some things to think about. But as we push forward, Clark Atlanta is now on the top of the SIAC East in men's basketball. So let's go ahead and break down what this means, how we got here, as we wrap up today's episode of Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by Talkspace. Therapy is a game changer, and it can help manage stress, improve sleep, and communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule can be a challenge, and that's where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace is the leading virtual provider of therapy, making getting help help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With Talkspace, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your need, usually within just 48 hours, so it doesn't take long. It is convenient, so you can have sessions from the comfort of your own house. There's nothing worse than feeling uncomfortable when you're in a therapy session. But when you're at your house, you're relaxing on your couch, in your environment, it's easy to feel comfortable, and that's what Talkspace provides to you. As a listener of the podcast, you will get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/lockedoncollege and enter the promo SPACE80. To match with a licensed therapist today, go to Talkspace.com/lockedoncollege, enter the program or the promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show your support for the show. That's Talkspace.com/lockedoncollege with the code SPACE80. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day, making it all the way to segment 3. And I thank you 2 times for that. Thank you. Thank you. We've gone through Norfolk State, the straight up honesty provided by Michael Vick. I really want to know how people react to that. And then also we looked at the new quarterback who's come in, Izzy Carter. But now let's switch gears and not only go to a different conference, but go to a different subdivision. And that is Clark Atlanta. Briefly, Clark won a big game over Edward Waters. They won a big game over Edward Waters last night that put them on top of the SIAC standings. I mean, as things stand today, no pun intended, right? But as things stand today, they are 8-2. First off, let's look at the difference between the East and the West. So in the East, you got 5 teams who are at 500 or better. Clark Atlanta 8-2, Edward Waters 8-3, Albany State 8-3, Morehouse 6-3, Fort Valley State 5-5. Then you have Savannah State at 5-6, and finally you get to a team with a losing record in conference play. Meanwhile, you go to the West, you got Miles at 10-1, best record in the conference, and they've beaten some of these guys, right? Like they've beaten Clark Atlanta. I think they beat Albany. I think they beat Edward Waters. So like they've beaten some of these guys. So you don't want to sit here and disrespect them and say, oh, they're just taking advantage of cupcakes. No. But on the West, it is just Miles, and then Tuskegee at 6-4. And then after that, you're looking at Kentucky State at 6-7. So you have two teams compared to 5. And that 6-4 would rank them 5th in the East. Right? Like we're just talking in general. It's not a great record for them. But anyway, Clark Atlanta versus Edward Waters. It was a big game. It was an important game. It was one that really, so far early, we're about 10 games for most people. Everybody except for Morehouse and Allen, I believe. Yeah, every team except for Morehouse and Allen have at least 10 games played. So I think this is a good time to tap in and check, kind of check where everybody is standing. Nice little checkpoint, in my opinion. But this is the team that rose above everybody else. Clark Atlanta did it last year. They're doing it so far this year. They're 8-2, and I feel like that was a pivotal matchup. This week or this weekend, they have a game against Albany State on Saturday. If Clark Atlanta can come out victorious against Edward Waters on Monday, which already happened Monday night, and then come out victorious against Albany State on Saturday, then we're looking at Clark really putting a little bit of distance. And this is going to be the first time that they play against their teams in their division that are competitive with them. It's the first time. You haven't played Morehouse yet. You haven't played Morehouse is going to be in 3 games. You played Edward Waters and you played Miles. That's it. You ain't even played Tuskegee yet. So, as far as Clark Atlanta goes, I think this back-to-back is important. I'm going to give you one number from each team that's super important, and it's so interesting. Clark, first off, won this game on not a buzzer beater, but they won this game with 5 seconds left. Let me read to you some of the more interesting stats, because I think the bigger story here is really what happens, why this is important, how this is impactful, and we've done that already. But here goes a cool number for you. So they're pretty even across the board, points in the paint, turnovers, pretty simple. But one place that Edward Waters has the huge advantage is that they had 22 points off a turnover compared to Clark Atlanta 6. Why that is interesting is because in the final minute, they tied the game up because of a turnover. They got a steal and they went down and scored. That's how they tied the game up. And their defining number was their overwhelming lead in points off turnovers. But then the winner, Clark Atlanta, their overwhelming lead was second chance points, where they had 20 of them, and Edward Waters only had 4. Only had 4 second chance points. Guess how Clark Atlanta won? With a second chance bucket. It was tied up. They missed the 3-pointer, got the board, put it back up, and scored. I love when these type of things happen. The standout stat for both teams, whether it was second chance points for the eventual victors in Clark Atlanta, or if it was points off of turnovers and leads to point and fast break points, all of that for Edward Waters, it all comes down to the last 5 seconds, and their best trait was shown, but also their worst trait was shown. It's a great last minute. Great last minute. But I appreciate you for the last minute of today's show. In the meantime, in between time, we'll be back tomorrow with Aaron Smith for sure, talking about what I expect from him in the Shrine Bowl. In the meantime, in between time, until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.